Recording. If everybody mute themselves except Ron and the speaker, Irv.
Okay. Well, good. But my notes, I have to tell Alan to start recording, but apparently he has. Okay, good. Good evening. I'm Ron Bodenson. Welcome to tonight's Zoom session. This is the last one before the summer break, so make the most of it. We will have breakout sessions tonight with a proposed topic for consideration. And then after the breakout session and questions and answers are completed, there will be a brief remembrance of Marty Samuels by Larry Ricketts at the end. Okay, so I'm going to introduce the man who needs no introduction. That's right, perhaps, but I first met Irwin Blond in kindergarten in Kansas City. All I remember was that he was taller than I was. And the other thing I remember is I could not say Irwin. So he was Irv to me, or Blondie. Then by sixth grade, he transferred to a private school called Pembroke Country Day. And I did not meet up with Irv again until high school, when we played basketball against each other. By then, Irv was an all-state star, and notwithstanding his much smaller school, he and his team always beat us public school kids. In one game, though, I thought I got even. I stole the ball from him at half court, only to be embarrassed when I went down to the other end and missed the uncontested layup. So that wasn't good. Senior year, I learned that two guys from Kansas City were going to Williams along with me, Gordy G and Irv Blond. And somehow during that summer before freshman year, I convinced Irv to travel back to Williamstown with me on the train. I said, you can bring all the luggage you want, you know. I had failed, however, to mention that the sleeping berths were only 5 feet long. So that was unfortunate. Then the Williams years, where Irwin faced a terrible misfortune just as classes started when his father died. But he had great resiliency and he returned to Williams. And by the end of the fall, he returned to the sport he loved. And all of us had the good fortune for 4 years to watch him play basketball. And he continued to be the star that he had been in high school. Following college, Irwin went to the University of Missouri in Columbia for law school. He was on law review and graduated top order of the coif. He then joined a growing law firm in Kansas City. And within not too many years, he became the chairman of the real estate group and eventually became managing partner of the law firm. I was in Kansas City and was aware of his practice. He had a dynamic national practice in real estate. In short, Irv continued in the legal profession to be the same heavy hitter he had been on the court. After 50 years, Irv finally retired in 2021. Why? Well, as he likes to say, he lost his appeal. But in truth, he got to spend more time with his wife, Sharon, his 2 sons, his 3 stepkids, and I know he's got 1 grandson. Along the way, Blondie faced a bigger challenge than any commercial real estate project posed to him. How to ensure his son the best and longest life possible, given his congenital disorder. Let's hear from Irv how he managed this challenge.
Thank you, Ron. That was very generous, too generous. First off, I want to thank each of you for taking the time to participate in this call. I hope you'll find it worthwhile and thought-provoking. This is a story about my journey from the heartbreak of having a child born with cystic fibrosis, also known as CF, an incurable genetic disease, to the unbridled joy and gratitude as a result of the development of a life-changing miracle drug that revolutionized the treatment of the disease and normalized the quality of life and the life expectancy for many people who have CF. This involves a journey that opened up the worlds of medicine, science, and philanthropy for me. And through my involvement with the CF Foundation, enabled me to meet many special, dedicated, and accomplished people. It also gave me a front row seat in the war against CF. Although I certainly could not have predicted it, this journey turned out to be one of the most fulfilling and rewarding chapters of my life, a highlight of my life. It is a journey which led me from Kansas City with stops in Atlanta, Washington, D.C., and eventually back to Williamstown. After I left Williams, I went to law school, and upon graduation joined a large law firm in Kansas City, which is my hometown. I married, my wife became pregnant. It was 1973. Everything was going just fine, and needless to say, I was excited about the upcoming birth of my first child. I didn't know life was getting ready to throw me a Sandy Koufax-sized curveball. During the first few weeks of our son Brian's life, we noticed his breathing was somewhat irregular and uneven. This being our first child, we really didn't know what to expect, but it concerned us enough that we asked the pediatrician about it. Our son appeared perfectly normal, but the pediatrician suggested we go to Children's Mercy Hospital, the local children's hospital, to have him examined and tested. My guess is he suspected something. When we arrived, we were told they wanted to test for cystic fibrosis. I'd heard the name before, but I had no idea what the disease involved. CF is a chronic genetic disease that affects the lungs and in most instances the pancreas. There are about 30,000 people in the United States and about 105,000 people diagnosed globally who have CF. It primarily involves people of Northern and Eastern European descent and Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry. It is rare among Africans and Asians. There are about 10 million carriers of the gene in the United States, about 1 in every 20 to 30 people. In 1973, there was no way to determine definitively whether you were a CF carrier unless you had previously had a child with CF. The CF gene is a recessive gene. The child gets one copy of the gene from each parent. So each time 2 carriers have a child, there's a 1 in 4 chance that the child will have CF. There's 2 in 4 chance that the child would be a carrier. And there's a 1 in 4 chance that it neither has the disease nor is it a carrier. The genetic mutation that causes CF apparently survived because it provided its carriers with some extra immunity. Having 1 copy of the CF gene, i.e. a carrier, seems to protect against diarrheal diseases like cholera and typhoid. Thus, CF carriers were more likely to survive such plagues compared to those without the mutation. It's a damnable disease. We all have mucus lining our lungs. Normally, this mucus is slippery and watery and helps move germs and bacteria out of our lungs. For people with CF, the mucus is sticky and viscous. As a result, instead of the mucus lubricating, it clogs the lungs, making it more difficult to breathe, and it becomes a breeding ground for bacterial infections. About 90% of the people with CF also have pancreatic involvement, restricting the production of digestive enzymes so that food is not properly absorbed. Generally, the pancreatic involvement can be addressed by taking digestive enzymes, So in most instances, the pancreatic problem can be kept under control. The lung issues, on the other hand, are an ongoing and life-threatening problem. The definitive test for CF in 1973 was a sweat test to determine the salt content of a person's sweat. Significantly high content indicated the person had CF. Brian was difficult to diagnose because he had no pancreatic involvement, as his weight and growth were normal. His initial test was negative. Nonetheless, he continued to exhibit some uneven breathing, and so we had him retested. Upon the retest, they confirmed that he had cystic fibrosis. We were told he had a 50-50 chance to live to age 19. At that time, people with CF were dying before they reached their teens, there being a few exceptions who lived into their 20s, and some that were really lucky got into their 30s. After we gathered ourselves, we had to develop a game plan as to how we proceed. With respect to Brian, my concerns were twofold. First, his physical health and well-being, and secondly, his mental health. I also wanted to identify any local CF chapter and any national organization so I could become involved in fundraising and determine where things stood in identifying a possible cure or control of the disease. We were very fortunate because Brian's disease was not as severe as some others with CF. He didn't have repeated episodes of severe lung infections to the extent of others, and his deterioration of lung function did not progress as rapidly as many others with CF. Once or twice a year, he had to go into the hospital for a week in order to have what is called a cleaning out, where they administered antibiotics by IV in order to keep repeated infections and inflammation in the lungs under control as much as possible. He also had a few hospitalizations, but on balance did remarkably well, although he was steadily losing lung capacity. He had a daily 1-hour routine, including percussion or vibration of his chest and back to help him expel any mucus plugs that developed in his lungs. Basically, I would sit down and he would lie head first on my legs towards the ground, and then I would cup my hands. I think you can see this, cup, and then you percuss his lungs like this, and you do it on the back, on the sides, and on the chest until he coughs up some mucus. He never complained. It was just part of his day. Later devices were developed that hydrated and thinned the mucus in the lungs and enabled persons with CF to administer vibrations themselves so that the second party became unnecessary. Use of such devices also slowed down the deterioration and scarring of the lungs. We also had him involved in competitive swimming in order to exercise his lungs. He became very good, particularly at the backstroke. When he was in high school, the medley relay team on which he swam the backstroke leg won the Kansas State Championship. With respect to his mental health, I was concerned he might feel inferior to his peers or have a chip on his shoulder about having CF. He might lack self-confidence and be withdrawn. I was 100% wrong. He became very outgoing, engaging, respectful, self-confident, and gregarious with a wonderful sense of humor. But having to live with CF resulted in his developing a spine of steel. I think with adversity, that adversity does that to you. If it doesn't defeat you, it makes you stronger. It reminds me of a buddy of mine from law school who was drafted after our second year, but instead decided to join the Marines. He was wounded in Vietnam. After recovery and discharge, he returned to law school to finish his final year. I asked him what law school was like after he returned. He said the law professors were no longer intimidating. He said after you've had bullets flying by your head, the professors were a piece of cake. Brian, in effect, had bullets flying by his head regularly. Brian's mother and I divorced in 1976 when he was 3 years old. I didn't remarry until 1984, so there were about 8 years he and I had extensive one-on-one time. I wanted to create as many memories as possible for each of us. Among other things, he and I would take a vacation each spring and summer. We traveled to various locations around the country, but our favorite spot was New York City. Each year we'd go to the city to have him examined by a CF specialist that I had met at the CF board meetings. The exam took a full day, but we made it into a fun trip and stayed in New York City for about a week. We always stayed at the old Williams Club and took in Broadway shows and games at Yankee Stadium and Madison Square Garden. I even tried to impress him with my extensive knowledge of art at MoMA and the Metropolitan. I think he was bored, and I know he was certainly unimpressed. I have some pictures from that period. Alan, you're up. Can you pull the first one? Yeah, this is a picture, and he's about 5 years old. This is our neighborhood in Kansas City where it was a July 4th parade. You can go to the next one. This is in at Del Mar Racetrack. Well, you skipped through that second one. Can you go back to the second one? There you go. This is at Del Mar Racetrack outside of San Diego, San Diego is a great place to take kids with the zoo and the beach and all kinds of things. But anyway, this is at the racetrack, and he's probably about, I'd say maybe 6 or 7 in that picture. This is in Edgartown on Martha's Vineyard. He's celebrating his 8th birthday. And you can see he's getting ready to blow those candles out. And then this is in New York at the Williams Club. It's the old Williams Club. And you can see he's properly attired. And in fact, we stayed there for several years, and I called one year to make a reservation, and they said they changed their protocol, and you couldn't just be an alum. You had to either be a member or be sponsored by a member. So I asked the manager to check to see if anybody in the 67 class was a member, and he said Greg Meister was a member. So I contacted Greg, and he was kind enough to sponsor us for a couple of years. And then I think you got one more. Yeah, this is Brian. He's hailing a cab in New York. He's probably, I'd say 7. He's probably 7 or 8 in that picture. Thanks, Alan. After Brian was diagnosed, I contacted the local cystic fibrosis office to see what I could do. It was a small organization, and they did not raise much money. They had just hired a new executive director who turned out to be very dynamic. She and I came up with a game plan as to how to start numerous events to raise funds to fight CF. There is one particularly interesting. Tom Watson, the pro golfer, and I went to the same high school. He was a few years behind me, but we knew each other. He had been on the pro tour for a couple of years, and we asked him if he'd agree to be involved in a golf tournament we would name after him. He agreed, and the first annual Tom Watson Cystic Fibrosis Golf Tournament became a reality. It was a great success. However, the first became the last. Later in the year, he won his first of 5 British Opens, and his brother-in-law, who was his agent, thought it best that he become involved with Children's Mercy Hospital rather than a national agency limited to one disease. Quite frankly, although I was disappointed, I think he made the right decision, and he had an annual event for Children's Mercy Hospital that raised millions of dollars over the years. Nonetheless, we were very successful. in our fundraising, and we rose to rank second in the country for several years as far as funds raised for cystic fibrosis. As a result of the success of our local chapter, I joined the National Cystic Fibrosis Board of Trustees, which turned out to be a truly remarkable experience. I served on the national board for 25 years until the early 2000s. The board consisted of some of the top cystic fibrosis researchers and physicians from around the country, as well as some dedicated volunteers. The chair of the national board was Frank DeFord, with whom many of you may be familiar. He was a legendary sports writer at Sports Illustrated and was generally considered the top sports writer in the country. He wrote numerous books, and he also had a weekly segment on NPR, Morning Edition, for about 30 years, where he talked about various sports personalities and events. He had lost his daughter at 8 years of age to CF and wrote a book about her, Alex, the Life of a Child, which was made into a movie. I started reading it, but it was too emotional for me to finish. Everyone has a handful of people whom they put on a pedestal and who are very special. Frank is in my group. He was quite a guy. He was truly a mensch, and certainly on my Mount Rushmore. I was in him because I became a vice chair of the foundation, and we would meet twice a year. He was always willing to help in any way he could, regardless of how much it inconvenienced him. One of the events we held in Kansas City was a gala ball where we honored a civic leader. In 1985, the Kansas City Royals had won the World Series, and the honoree was Ewing Kauffman, who then owned the Royals. I asked Frank if he would be willing to come to Kansas City and give the keynote speech and present the award. I didn't expect him to say yes, but he agreed. It was a memorable evening, certainly for me. I was the MC of the event. I introduced Frank, and Frank gave his usual eloquent speech and presented the award to Ewing Kauffman. When I joined, the national board was located in Atlanta. We decided there was no reason to stay in Atlanta, and it would be best to move to Washington, D.C., where the National Institutes of Health, otherwise known as NIH, and Congress were located. We would then be in a much better position to lobby for funding and work with NIH. By moving to Washington, D.C., we were also able to hire a new administrator named Bob Bell, who had been responsible for cystic fibrosis funding and research at the foundation and played a crucial role in the fight against CF. Although nationally we had done a decent job of raising funds, there was limited progress being made to identify the cause of the disease. The major pharmaceutical companies were not interested because the CF population was small and the disease was considered a rare orphan disease. They didn't feel there was enough money to justify their efforts. As a result, we started and funded a research development program at 9 universities, where top clinical and basic research professionals concentrated their efforts on CF research. Some progress was made, improving the quality of life and extending the life expectancy for people with CF, but still we were unable to make a significant breakthrough. Our big break came in 1989, when the CF gene was identified by Francis Collins and Lap Chi Su, a scientist in Canada. Francis Collins later chaired the Human Genome Project, and he just recently retired as the chair of NIH. He reported his findings to the board and said the identification of the gene was a game changer. I remember asking him how long it would take to find a cure or control for the disease. He said within 10 years, when Brian would be 26. Unfortunately, he was mistaken. After the gene was identified, it was determined the defect was the result of a certain protein produced by cells in our lungs, pancreas, and sweat glands, either being defective for various reasons or unable to function properly. This protein regulates the movement of chloride ions in and out of our cells through channels. As a result, the cell surface in people with CF contains an imbalance of salt and water, causing the mucus being produced by those cells to be dehydrated. Although they identified the defect in the gene, researchers were unable to repair or replace the gene because, among other things, they couldn't find a delivery vehicle that would not be rejected by the body. Quite simply, gene repair, replacement, or editing didn't work. There are now significant advances being made in possible gene editing and repair through technologies known as CRISPR and mRNA. Although there has not yet been a eureka moment, it would not be surprising if some genetic diseases, including CF, were cured sooner rather than later as a result of these innovative technologies. Everyone was quite frustrated, but Bob Bell and others in the scientific community thought it might be possible to use a chemical compound to coax the protein that is not working to function again. As a result, the foundation made a huge bet, and we contracted with Aurora Biosciences, a small startup in San Diego that in 2001 was acquired by Vertex Pharmaceutical, a publicly traded company located in Boston. Aurora was willing to collaborate with the foundation in finding such a compound. Over time, the foundation invested $30 million with Aurora and $120 million with Vertex to fund their investigation. Various chemicals and compounds were tested through a procedure called ultra-high throughput screening. This involved the use of automated equipment to rapidly conduct millions of chemical tests to identify compounds to correct the function of the protein so the cells would work properly. To give you an idea of the scale of this undertaking, in a research lab, about 3 chemicals could be tested each day. With ultra-high throughput screening, 25,000 chemical combinations could be tested each day. After some time, a compound was identified which influenced the protein and the operation of the channels to the cell surface. The molecular structure of the compound had to be altered, and the chemical had to be converted to a drug with limited side effects so it could be approved by the FDA. But ultimately, a drug known as Kalydeco was approved by the FDA in 2012, 23 years after the CF gene had been identified. The drug was approved for use with certain CF mutations, of which there are about 1,500. It worked miracles for those able to benefit from it. In hindsight, the foundation's financial commitment to ultra-high throughput screening was a key to launching the process leading to the development of Kalydeco. Brian originally did not qualify since he had a rare mutation for which the drug was not approved. 2 or 3 years after the drug received FDA approval, Brian received a call from a researcher at the Stanford CF clinic in Palo Alto, California, where he regularly was examined and treated. She told him, although his specific mutation was not approved for treatment for Kalydeco, she felt his mutation was in a category that would benefit from it. A Stanford physician prescribed the drug, and Brian was approved for off-label use. Eventually, Kalydeco was approved by the FDA for his mutation. He started taking Kalydeco in 2015, and within 24 hours after taking the drug, he said he stopped coughing, his breathing improved, and he felt better than he had in years. The drug allowed the cell channels to remain open long enough and the protein to function properly, so the salt and water imbalance on the cell surface was corrected. It's hard to describe the range of emotions you feel at a time like this. We didn't know whether to celebrate or cry, so we did both. I thought of the many people, both locally and nationally, who for decades had sacrificed their time, energy, and resources to fight this deadly disease. I thought of those who had lost a friend or relative to CF, and those who had mutations which were not corrected by Kalydeco. So there was a tinge of guilt and sorrow. I, of course, thought of Brian, who had endured so much and could now live his life without a dark cloud overhead. I could go on, but the best phrase I can come up with to describe our feelings is pure joy. It was pure joy to witness the miracle of Kalydeco. In 2019, Kalydeco became part of a triple therapy in the form of a drug known as Trikafta. There are still about 10% of the mutations not addressed by Trikafta, and many people with CF, with various CF mutations, still have ongoing issues. There's still no cure for CF. Brian's disease has stabilized, and he will hopefully have a normal quality of life and life expectancy. He lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. He's a partner in a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley and has a wife and 2 children. He's a wonderful son, brother, husband, and father. Brian will be 50 years old this coming September. He's my hero. Alan, you're up again. Next one after that. It's a graduation.
That cab never came.
Sorry, we have a little technical difficulties here. We'll figure it out. Sorry, I'll try to find these in a second.
That's okay. You want me to go ahead and then we can come back to it? Okay.
Give it one more shot.
There you go. Well, yeah, go back there. This is Brian at his college graduation. That's Brian on the left. And then he's got a friendly headlock on his younger brother, Sam. Next picture. This is Brian moved out to California, to San Francisco in this is where he's about 25. That's Brian on the left, yours truly, and then Sam, who is 12 years younger than Brian. This is in front of his 2-story walk-up in San Francisco. And then the next one. This is in this past February at the Super Bowl in Glendale, Arizona. That's Brian's son, Zach, on the left. That's Brian with the KC heart. That's me. And then Sam's on the right. I do have a little story to tell about this picture. I submitted pictures to Ron and Alan for this presentation. And Alan, who is very straightforward, he suggested that I not use this picture because it was unflattering of me. I asked if he could Photoshop it and increase my height by a couple of inches and maybe slim down my belly by several inches. He said that he was incapable of doing that. I concluded that modern technology had apparently not encountered a problem of this magnitude. So even though my picture's pretty bad, there were 3. Where are you going, Al? You cut me off? Anyway, that's okay. I'm about to. Anyway, I liked the picture of the other 3, and I did go on a diet after I had the conversation with Alan. As a side note, when the arrangement with Aurora was negotiated, the foundation obtained a sales royalty from the proceeds of any drug developed as a result of the foundation funding. This is known as venture philanthropy and was pioneered by the CF Foundation. It now is emulated by many other health organizations. Instead of using investment funds as in venture capital, publicly donated funds are used. Proponents of venture philanthropy, and certainly the CF board, maintain the high financial return helps speed any drug development and provides potential monetary rewards that can go towards more research. The royalty benefits from Kaleido and Trikafta were substantial. The foundation for over $3.3 billion and received a further payment of $575 million in 2020. Now the Williams connection. In 1989, Dick Quinn became the sports information director at Williams. That position didn't exist when we were in school. Dick has held the position for over 30 years and is the only sports information director Williams has ever had. He lost a daughter to cystic fibrosis at a very young age. He wanted to establish an award honoring a student assistant each year whom he felt was most helpful in his fulfilling the duties of the sports information director. He had many students working for him every year, doing statistics, photos, writing articles, updating the website, preparing press releases, and player profiles. There was quite a bit of work, as Williams has about 32 sports teams. He wanted to name the award after Frank Ford, but didn't know whether Frank would accept. He had two hooks. First, Frank's favorite color was purple. He used a pen with purple ink and always wore a purple tie and a purple handkerchief in his coat breast pocket. The second hook, and most importantly, was the CF connection, both Dick and Frank having lost daughters to CF at a young age. Frank accepted, and there is now an award at Williams named the Frank DeFord Award, given annually to a deserving student in sports information. When Frank agreed to have the award named after him, he reportedly said to Dick, "The only other time I ever had anything named after me was a racehorse who didn't win a race in 3 years, so they turned it into a gelding." That was typical of Frank, who was always humble and self-deprecating. Frank appeared 3 times to speak and present the award. Alan, if you could show that picture, please. There you go. That's Frank on the left. I think this picture is from about 2014 or 2015. Frank on the left, notice the purple tie and the purple handkerchief. The student recipient in the middle, and then that's Dick Quinn on the right. They've had an illustrious list of speakers over the years, including Jay Billis at ESPN, Fay Vincent, former Major League Baseball commissioner and a Williams grad, Jonathan Kraft, whose family owns the New England Patriots, and he's also a Williams grad, Bob Ryan, formerly of the Boston Globe and ESPN, Tim Layden, a Williams grad, who was a Sports Illustrated writer, and he wrote the Mike Riley article that appeared in Sports Illustrated several years ago, and John Feinstein of the Washington Post, an author of numerous sports books. Interestingly, John Feinstein wrote a book titled Caddy for Life, the story of Bruce Edwards, who was Tom Watson's longtime caddy who died of ALS. I met Dick at one of our reunions, and we had a nice conversation. He said he was raised in Williamstown and had gone to Mount Greylock High School. He said he used to come to our basketball games. It was indeed a small world. Frank was also given a National Humanities Medal by President Obama in 2013, and he received an honorary degree from Williams in 2016. Unfortunately, he died in 2017. What are some of the lessons learned from my journey? Miracles do happen, so never give up. Surround yourself with the best and the brightest, and good things, sometimes amazing things, will happen. There's a thin line between courage and stupidity, but in order to achieve something transformative, you must be bold and willing to take informed risk. Sometimes the most rewarding experiences arise out of a situation of despair. I never would have met so many special people or seen firsthand the development of a miracle drug if my son had not been born with CF. Many of the CF board members had family and friends with cystic fibrosis, but the people who always amaze me, whom I call the strangers to CF, were the scientists, physicians, and volunteers who just wanted to help. There are indeed people in this world who are true angels. All of us have difficult issues with which we must deal. No one's exempt. We should not complain and just do the best we can with the cards we're dealt. I'll conclude with a quote from Jim Valvano, the former North Carolina State basketball coach. He said at his famous ESPY award speech when he was dying of cancer, "A good day is when you laugh and emotions move you to tears and you spend some time in thought. I've been very lucky. I've had a lot of good days. Thank you."
Wow. Thank you, Irwin. That was very, very interesting. Thank you very much. Larry Ricketts has set out some breakout groups, and you'll be automatically placed into one for about 12 minutes. We suggest the following topic to discuss if you want to. At this stage in life, virtually all of us have faced the unexpected and sometimes serious personal, family, or work issues. In what ways have you found the strength and resiliency to deal with these challenges? So put us in breakout groups and see if we have something to talk about.
Just in case somebody doesn't get in a breakout room, I think that hopefully just Alan and myself, and I can put Alan in one. If you don't, I learned how to do it, so don't panic. Here you go.
I should pause recording, right, Larry?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for reminding yourself, Alan. You proud of you.
Irv, I just wanted to say hello, and I was thinking of you, but I'm going to definitely pick it up on the YouTube recording when it's out.
Okay, that sounds great.
Very well.
Hey, we're
Well,
back.
Wally, we're not going to watch your second walk now since you ignored Irv.
No.
Alan, you started the recording again? Okay.
Yeah, Alan,
I think
start
we all need to
recording.
mute ourselves, though. We're unmuted, so. You, Ron, go for it.
Find it.
Okay.
Oh,
Well,
sorry, other Ron.
I'm not sure if any group has anything they'd like to report, or if someone has a question or comment on their own. So raise your hand and I'll call upon you. We do have one question that popped up, and I'll throw it out to Irwin. What on earth is the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation doing with $4 billion? Are they doing good? Are they taking care of people who can't afford the drug? Or are they investing it in gold mines someplace?
I can't, well, I know what they're doing somewhat, but the drug, there's a lot of ethical issues that arise. I didn't get into it because it's you can talk about it for a long time, the pros and cons. But the Kaleido, it costs over $300,000 a year. And some doctors, CF doctors, had written Vertex, to say you got to bring the cost down. And Vertex, they insisted that they spent a lot of money, researching and developing this, and they got to recoup their costs. And so when Brian was approved for off-label use, we had that means he wasn't insured, it wasn't covered by insurance. And so I called Bob Bell and talked to him about it. I said, you've got this money. Do you guys fund anything here for people that don't have insurance on this, or and I couldn't get anywhere with him. I mean, and I don't know. It sounds lousy that you couldn't use that to help people get the drug that aren't insured or can't afford it. But I don't know all the pros and cons of it. I know the CF Foundation's spending a fortune on continuing to research because there's lots of patients now that Kalydeco doesn't help them, and so there's still lots of people with CF that are dying, but I can't answer your question. I know. I mean, they are spending it on CF research and related matters, but I don't have the total answer to your question.
Okay. Again, anybody who wants to report from their group or has a question, another issue came up, and maybe hopefully not too touchy to raise in our group, but back in the day, parents would not know if their unborn child had the CF gene. Presumably today, they would be able to test for the CF gene in the womb or unborn child. Is a cure good enough today to have a child with the gene and expect a normal life? I don't know, you or any of the doctors in the group would comment on that.
Well, as I said, when Brian was born, there was no way to know whether he had CF. After 89, they know they can test to see if you're a carrier, number one, and then they can take amniotic fluid. They can tell whether the child's going to have CF or not. I don't know, and maybe a doctor on here can't. I don't know if they can tell what the mutation is, the CF mutation from amniotic fluid, or whether they can just tell that the child would have CF. But there's a huge ethical and religious, however you want to characterize it, issue. If you knew you were going to have a kid with CF, and would you abort? I mean, a lot of people don't even believe in abortion. I don't want to get into the abortion issue, but if would you do that or not? Well, obviously, with my experience, I wouldn't even think about it. I've got a buddy in Denver who had a child with Down syndrome. He said it was the best thing that ever happened to his family. He said the kids, it brought them all so much closer and everything. So it's that's a real personal issue, and I think everybody's got to look themselves in the mirror and kind of decide on their own what they do.
Okay, so am I missing something? I don't see a hand up.
I just make a comment, Ron, and I jumped in a few groups, and Joel Rosenthal made a comment that I think is true, Irv, that really it's just what you'd call a patch right now. It's not really a cure at all, and it doesn't patch number of the disease in other. Is that correct in what we're saying?
What it is, I wasn't going to go into too much detail, but the mutation that has not been addressed, and it's about 10% of the people with CF. They have what's called a nonsense or stop mutation, and what happens is that protein I referred to, it's formed. It goes along an assembly line, and the stop mutation, it stops the production of on the assembly line. It stops working about halfway through the assembly line. So by the time the protein gets to the end of the assembly line, it's a bunch of junk. And so the Kalydeco, if you don't have the protein, the drugs don't help you any. And those are the kids that are still, just they have not been helped by the drug therapy at all.
Ron, it looks like Dave Reichert has his hand up.
Right, Dave?
Yes, in our group, we recognize that most of us don't have any direct experience with family or friends with cystic fibrosis, in part because the relative numbers are so small. The movie 5 Feet Apart was mentioned quite positively. Are you familiar with that, and would you recommend it as a way to gain more insight?
I'm not familiar with that.
It was mentioned, I think, by Bobo as a movie about either two kids who had cystic fibrosis and were friends. Maybe.
That's exactly right. Well, Google it.
I'm glad you mentioned it. I will definitely do that.
It was a mainstream movie. It was pretty successful and it made me tear up. One of the teenagers got a lung transplant, and the other one, or was going to, and the other one didn't make it. And the reason it was called 5 Feet Apart was that we all are familiar with 6 feet apart from our COVID days. That was the rule. And to be rebellious, they shaved a foot off their intimacy.
Interesting. Well, we'll write that down. Okay, well, I think that's going to conclude it tonight. Thank you, Irv, for being so eloquent and brave, letting us know about this part of your life. As I said earlier, at the end, we're going to ask Larry Ricketts to make a few comments about Marty Samuels, who died earlier.
Irv sensitivity is a precursor to my speaking about my friendship with Marty. Alan was nice enough to post the Boston Globe article written beautifully about Marty's life. And I immediately wrote to the person who wrote it. And you can look online of my comments, so I won't go over them. But Marty and I were roommates for 4 years. His mother died, I think, right at the end. We were in college. And Marty was my best man in my wedding. I talked to Marty's father quite often because he built me up when I said what a great guy, as you all know, Marty was, and what a successful person he was in his own chosen field. And Sid always built me up and said, well, you're the best banker in the country, and people don't know that. My son just has to go and tout his own through speeches and others. So he was a great friend. And I had a roommate in business school whose son had learning disabilities, and my wife helped this guy out in finding a place for his son in Florida, in Miami, as a matter of fact, Joel. And he was in an accident. A car hit this boy's car, and his neck was severed. And obviously, he was distraught, unbelievably. He was still alive. I called Marty immediately. And as many of you, I think, in the class that have dealt with Marty for help, like Huff knows about Andy Cadeau, and many of you have gotten Marty's help. He dropped everything. He got a surgeon that saved this boy's life by able to put his thorax back together. I didn't understand it all. When my son-in-law had a tumor on his spine 3 years ago, Marty found a surgeon, and as my daughter just said, saved his life. So it's tough. I'm sorry. I'm going to remember his humor more than anything else. He was just a funny guy. His wife contacted me immediately. I let the class officers know, and I let Maud know. And Susan asked me not to go into, so please don't ask me questions about his brief illness. Susan just wants to remember his fabulous life. So I will honor her request, and I hope you will too. Thanks for letting me talk about it, Ron. Sorry.
Thanks, Larry.
Huff?
No, I dealt with Marty with Andy Caddo, and I think one of the things that was just incredible is as Andy was going through his disease, which actually didn't turn out to be what they thought it was, but Marty was there all the time. Andy would see him, go down and visit with him for lunch, and Marty came up in the last weeks and visited with Andy, and the three of us got on the telephone together. And Marty was just as humorous as could be. Andy was just enjoying it. And I just know how, with so many of the people in the class, very quietly, people would go to him, and he would just be there. And that's the way I think we all want to remember him, is being there with a sense of really just warmth, compassion, and pride in our class. He had really enjoyed being a member of the class. And I think that's something that I will hold, and it'll be a part of me for forever.
Well, I've got it together again. I just want to thank all of you that wrote me notes. And I especially thank Ron Bodenson and Carol Perry for being right by my side during this time.
Ooh.
I just want to thank you, Larry, for sharing as you did, and Irv also. Really showed us some good models for how to be a Williams man. Thank you, both of you.
Is Alan or John, is there any forward look to next fall now that we've given these students a couple of months off?
I know, I just saw Bob Conway's hand up, Ron.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. The last meeting we had, Mike Roizen said one of the requirements of a healthy long life is having 6 people you can be vulnerable with. And a number of you today have been vulnerable in front of 20 to 30 people. So as Greg Meister said, you set a great example for all of us. Thank you.
I just was reminded of one other thing. Our Zoom videos are on YouTube because of Alan, and I really appreciate it. The one I moderated with Marty on the brain and the aging brain has had, I think the closest we've had in views, believe it or not, Irv, is our coaches as mentors, is 146 views. Marty's aging brain has had 1,200 views on YouTube. And so I've always been his wingman, and now I'll, in history, be able to be his wingman on Zoom.
I think the thing that Mike Roizen said about having a posse that you can be vulnerable with really hits home. And this group is gradually becoming my posse as we share what we're going through and our vulnerabilities. So I thank you all for that. And especially looks like half of the few of us are wearing purple. That makes me even more happy. So let's keep sharing, and we'll be back in the fall with some more valuable sharing. And that's what we're about now.
Excellent. Until then.
Good seeing you all.
Keep you posted.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay.
Thank you, Irv and Ron.
Thank you, Irv. That was really terrific.
Great
Thank you.
job, Irv.
Irv, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Great to see everyone.
Certainly was.
Thanks, Blondie.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Irv.
Thanks a lot to all you guys.
Good to see you, Irv.
Nice to be seen.
Yes, sir.
Could you stand up? We want to see your stomach.
No.
You don't have to
though.
do that, Irv. You don't have to do that.
You didn't tell me that was part of the deal.
No,
Yeah, hey, Irv, you didn't put that in your script, man.
I'm sure it's trimmed down. Yeah.
By the way, before we leave, I would like to thank Ron and Alan particularly. You guys were fantastic. I mean, they really helped me with the presentation, and Alan's really a guru on the computer. I mean, he was great. So thank you both very much.
Hey,
Hey,
it was our
Hey, Irv, you
pleasure.
still have that shot from the corner.
No.
Damn.
Wally,
Yeah,
we could help
that's a
you
long-
too. Just call us.
Okay.
Maybe a shot of scotch.
If
Yeah.
only there'd been a 3-pointer back then.
Yeah.
Hey,
There's
Gordy,
the other
Gordy G,
candidate,
Gordy G, hang on for a
Gordy.
minute when you go. I want to talk to you
Okay,
about Mark Rader.
okay.
Okay, so I didn't mean to interrupt, but
Okay.
I'm
Hi,
I'm
everybody.
We
bowing out.
leaving? Okay, you guys take care.
okay,
Thanks,
I,
Irv.
Hello, Ron Matthews.
You
Thanks so
guys.
much.
Hey, bye-bye.
I guess I'll stop.